Hey everybody, it's Andrew here, and welcome back to another update for seniors. So Mitch McConnell just flipped out. In this video, we're going to take a look and see what Mitch McConnell just said. We're also going to discuss this idea for the $1,400 stimulus check for seniors. Now, the Senior Citizens League is doubling down on this idea because inflation is getting even worse. So let's discuss the details. But before we jump into it, do me a quick favor, guys. If you guys like this content, please hit the like button and please subscribe. It really goes a long way. It makes YouTube know that you guys like it, and then it will promote it to other people as well. So really quick, we're going to talk about Mitch McConnell, why he just flipped out. We're going to talk about the $1,400 stimulus check and the fact that the Senior Citizens League is doubling down, saying that seniors need it more than ever with inflation getting so bad. And we're also going to do a quick update on daily trending news, including articles which are saying that Democrats should focus on Social Security benefits as a top issue before these midterm elections. So with that said, folks, let's take a quick look and see exactly why Mitch McConnell flipped out, blaming Democrats for inflation and saying that really it's Democrats and the Biden administration's fault for inflation being so bad. So let's take a look and let me know your thoughts in the comments below.
Moments ago, the country got yet another terrible monthly inflation report under the Biden administration. Yet again, the data confirm what working families already know painfully well. Rampant inflation and soaring prices are crushing the American people. Experts had predicted another red-hot inflation report, around 7%. Even that alone would have meant we were still trapped inside the worst inflation in 40 years. But reality turned out to be even worse than that. Turns out inflation this past year hasn't been 7%, it's been 7.5%. In other words, if you haven't personally gotten a pay raise of 8% or more in the last year, then Democrats' policies have given you a pay cut. To add insult to injury, reporters say the worst of this inflation was driven by the most painful categories for working families: food prices, energy prices, and rent. This is not about financial inconvenience for wealthy people who can afford to stomach it. This is about massive price increases for essential goods that make up a huge share of working families' budgets. Gas is up about 40% since this time last year. Used car prices are up about the same. Meat, fish, and eggs cost over 12% more than they did just 1 year ago. The cost of natural gas for home heating has soared by 24% since this time last year. Fuel oil has shot up almost 47%. The cost of essentials has absolutely exploded since Washington Democrats took power. And to be clear, the worst inflation in 40 years is not something that just spontaneously happened to Democrats on their watch. As a Pew report demonstrated late last year, it's true countries around the world are facing inflation. They are, as a result of COVID. But America has it worse than almost everybody else in the developed world. This is a direct result of liberal policy choices. Here's how Jason Furman, President Obama's CEA chairman, explained it recently. So I'll quote from the New York Times. The United States has had much more inflation than almost any other advanced economy in the world, said Jason Furman, an economist at Harvard and former Obama administration economic advisor, who used comparable methodologies to look across areas and concluded that U.S. price increases have been consistently faster. The difference, he said, comes because the United States stimulus is in a category of its own. Obviously, he's referring to the $2 trillion so-called rescue package last year. The severity of this inflation was directly fueled by the reckless far-left spending spree that every single Democrat in this chamber voted to ram through at President Biden's behest last year. Even the most prominent liberal economists knew this would happen and tried to warn the Democrats. A year ago, Larry Summers warned Democrats' binge could set off, quote, inflationary pressures of a kind we have not seen in a generation. But Democrats ignored their own experts. They plowed ahead, using the pandemic as a pretext to dump $2 trillion into left-wing policies that were overwhelmingly unrelated to the healthcare fight against the virus. And we see the results all around us. Families are living with the results every day. As recently as the last few days, some of my Democratic colleagues have come here to the floor to boast about the increase in nominal wages. They want a round of applause because the numbers on many America's paychecks have gone up. But that's staggeringly out of touch with the reality. Yes, in an inflationary spiral, lots of people will see the numbers on their paychecks go up. The problem is that even those bigger paychecks are buying Americans less in real terms today than their smaller paychecks bought them before Democrats were sworn in. It's like this. Democratic policies have created an inflation riptide that is forcing families and small businesses to swim as fast as they possibly can just to avoid getting sucked out to sea. But Democrats are trying to call this a success because of how fast everybody's arms and legs are moving. Talk about an absurd effort to spin your way out of reality. The truth is plain for everybody to see. A few weeks ago, the Washington Post ran a story with the headline, "That raise meant nothing." Inflation is wiping out pay increases for most Americans. The story explained, and this is a direct quote, many workers said that despite considerable pay raises, as much as 33% in some cases, they were still struggling to cover basic expenses. Several workers said they had taken second jobs to keep up with the rising costs for groceries, gas, and rent. So, American workers are not buying the Democrats' spin for 1 second. 1 year after President Biden took office, with massive economic tailwinds at his back, with an economy that was primed for a roaring comeback, 75% of Americans say our economy is doing badly. About 90% of Americans say they're concerned with inflation. 90% of Americans say they're concerned with inflation. A 60% supermajority say their family's income is falling behind the cost of living. So it didn't have to be this way, Madam President. This was and rent.
All right, guys. So let's talk about everything Mitch McConnell just said, and what we're going to point out, where he's kind of exaggerating things. We all know that Democrats and Republicans, they use these issues as an opportunity to slam the other side. So let's call him out. Let's see where he's exaggerating and where he's, quite honestly saying the facts. And again, all of these things affect seniors. Inflation affects seniors the most, not just seniors, people who are on benefits like SSI and SSDI. So these things are really, really important to keep track of. So he said that inflation is bad globally, and this is what Democrats are saying, like this is a global phenomenon. You can't really blame President Biden. Any president would be going through this. And Mitch McConnell's response is, well, inflation is actually worse in the United States compared to any other country on earth. And that is true. Things are worse here. And really the main thing is there's a higher demand here, right? America consumes way more than any other country. And we know that inflation is a balance between supply and demand. The entire world has supply chain shortages, and the U.S. has the highest demand. So although inflation is worse here, you can't necessarily blame that on President Biden. However, one thing you can blame on President Biden is the fact that they spent the last year saying that inflation was transitory. If they had been working on inflation a year ago, they'd probably be controlling inflation a whole lot better now than they would have to begin with. Of course, a lot of experts say that one of the best things they could do is a stimulus check for people who are low income to help them immediately with inflation, but we'll touch on that in just a second. Let's keep going and kind of dissect everything Mitch McConnell just said. He also said that the third stimulus check and the American Rescue Plan is one of the biggest issues that caused inflation. Now, first, let's talk about different parts of that package. First of all, there's the third stimulus check. You guys know that you got the third stimulus check almost a year ago at this point, and we know that that one stimulus check is not causing inflation a year later. We know that, especially people who are moderate to low income, everyone spent that money in the first couple of months. Now, one thing that could potentially be putting some pressure on inflation is that monthly child tax credit, those monthly stimulus checks for families with kids that literally just ended about 2 months ago. And quite frankly, they're still not over because families are going to be getting back pay stimulus payments for the first 6 months of 2021. We talked about that in detail in my previous video, that those monthly credits were only paid out for 6 months, and the first 6 months of 2021 are literally going to be paid in a massive lump sum payment to families when they file their taxes. So that is still a monthly stimulus check that could potentially have been adding to inflation. So in that situation, Mitch McConnell has a point. And I just want to point out that stimulus checks themselves don't necessarily cause inflation. Economists have shown, studies showed, that people who are lower income or moderate income don't cause inflation when you give them direct stimulus payments, because what they end up doing is using them for bare essentials like paying their bills, putting food on the table, paying their rent, maybe having, $1,000 in the bank, for God's sakes, to have a little bit of a cushion. This is why we have groups like the Senior Citizens League saying that we should be doing the $1,400 stimulus check for seniors as soon as possible to help them deal with inflation. And this isn't breaking news. We've been talking about this for a few months, but they recently doubled down on this and said, you know what? Inflation isn't a reason to not give the stimulus check to those who are low income. It's actually a reason to give them a stimulus check, right? And quite frankly, I completely agree. We're in a situation where inflation is tough, but we know that giving those who are lower income or moderate income a stimulus check really doesn't cause inflation. Now, Mitch McConnell went on to say that the Biden administration was warned a year ago that inflation would get worse, and quite frankly, that's the truth. He also went on to say that President Biden is trying to take credit for the increases in wages going on. People are getting historic raises, this year and last year compared to the last few decades. But he said that these wages are really not increasing because they're not keeping up with inflation. And that, quite frankly, is true. He said that if you didn't get an 8% raise, you basically got a pay cut. And that is true for Social Security and SSDI as well. People on benefits got a 5.9% COLA, and we all know that inflation came in at 7.5% last month. So you essentially got a pay cut as well. And then on top of that, you probably had your SNAP benefits cut and other things cut as well, like rental assistance. So again, just another reason why we could use a stimulus check for seniors or some kind of executive action to approve a larger COLA for seniors as well. So he then went on to talk about the idea of a wage increase inflation spiral, which we talked about in my previous video as well. That's when wages go up too fast, and then inflation goes up fast, then workers demand an increase in wages, they get those increases in wages, and then therefore companies have to increase prices again because wages is one of their biggest expense when it comes to companies increasing costs, and this just spirals up, up, and up. Now, Mitch McConnell talked about the fact that 75% of Americans who were polled think the economy is doing poorly. He also said that 90% of people in this country are concerned with inflation. And let me know in the comments, guys, what are the most pressing issues to you, besides benefits, of course? Do you think it's the economy, inflation, things like immigration? Democrats really spent the last year focusing on things besides the stimulus package, focusing on things like the physical stimulus plan, physical infrastructure, focusing on climate change, things like that, focusing on bolstering the electric vehicle infrastructure. And really, it seems like they really did miss the mark. But let me know your thoughts on that in the comments below. Now, Democrats, obviously, with these midterms coming up, are looking for ways to increase their numbers in the polls. And a lot of experts are saying, that they should make Social Security a top issue going into the midterms, not only to help seniors, but also seniors are the largest voting group in this country. So by doing so, they might help themselves in the polls. Now, really quick, folks, I'm going to share this clip with you guys. It details the fact that Democrats are not only doing poorly in the polls, but they're mainly doing poorly in the polls because Americans are really focused on two things: the inflation and the economy. And most people think Biden is doing poorly in both of those. Now, not to pick sides here, but this is what current polls are saying. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Really quick, let's watch this clip, see what they had to say. Then we're going to do some updates on trending news and kind of what we could expect to happen next when it comes to potentially getting Social Security increases and this stimulus check for seniors.
And a new CBS News poll shows Americans think he's not focused enough on key issues like the economy and inflation. 44% of Americans approve of the job he's doing overall, with a split on his handling of the coronavirus. When it comes to Mr. Biden's efforts on the economy, just over a third, 38%, approve. His handling of inflation is worse. 7 in 10 Americans disapprove. We turn now to CBS News Elections and Surveys Director Anthony Salvanto. Good morning to you, Anthony. What is weighing on the president's approval rating the most?
Good morning, Margaret. Let's start with COVID. Now, part of this is just expectations. At the start of his term, people thought COVID would get better, but right now, most people don't think the effort against the pandemic is going well. Part of a president's ratings always carry some of that general feeling. You look back at the start of his term, he got very strong approval ratings for handling the pandemic. That carried into the summer at 2/3 approval. Started to dip a little bit as cases got a little bit worse, some vaccine controversies, down to where it is now. Now, let's be clear. It's not that people blame a president for all of this. When you look at why people might think he's not doing a good job, the thing that stands out is information. People feel it's been confusing. That stands out. In fact, overall, people in the nation say that that guidance has been increasingly confusing, and that does accrue to a president. We know that the science is always trying to get a hold on this, but in the public mind, they do look for that clarity, Margaret.
Well, when it comes to the issues that we say matter here, the economy and inflation, what exactly is hurting the president?
Yeah, the economy story, the inflation story are stories about focus. And here's how. You start with a majority of people saying that the administration not focused enough on the economy, on inflation, and these are their most important issues. Sometimes politics is really simple. You've got to be seen attacking the problems that people think are paramount. Now, when you look at how that plays out in his ratings on the economy, well, what's to blame for it? It's a mixture of things. Again, some of it, yes, people blame his policies. There's also the pandemic. There's supply chain issues that people see in the mix. But when they don't think he's focused, they're more likely to disapprove overall. And then that goes to a broader sense of emotions about his first year. We see a lot of folks describing that as making them feel frustrated or disappointed. He's got to be seen looking at those problems that people think are paramount, and that is inflation, Margaret.
So this is the lowest point in his presidency when it comes to approval of how he's handling COVID, not approval of the economy and how he's handling inflation. I mean, do people just think he's wasting his time here?
Well, let's take a look, because we asked people, well, if you don't approve of the president, what might change your mind? And what really stood out is if he gets inflation down, people say they might improve their opinion. And that's a lot higher, I should add, than if he passes the Build Back Better Act. It's really about inflation, not legislation at this point. In fact, even for Democrats, even within his own party, when they rate him on the issues, they're toughest on him about being focused on inflation, Margaret.
The things that people actually experience. I know, Anthony, you've been tracking this for some time. It was back in the summer with the withdrawal from Afghanistan that we saw the president.
Not legislation.
All right, guys. So actually, one of the most interesting things we see here is people were polled and asked, what would change your opinion on President Biden? Either getting the Build Back Better stimulus package done, or would it be getting inflation down? And really interestingly, is only 24% of people said getting the Build Back Better stimulus package done would change their opinion on President Biden. And on the opposite side of that, almost 65% of people said if he controlled inflation, they would change their opinion on Biden in a positive way. So I'd be interested to see if you guys feel the same way. Would you be more impressed with Biden if he passed the Build Back Better package or if he successfully controlled inflation? Let me know your guys' thoughts in the comments below. I think really at the center of the matter here is what's in the Build Back Better package, right? Because the more time went on, the more it felt like Joe Manchin kept getting his way, and the things that we really wanted in this package continued to be taken out, right? With that said, we still had Bernie Sanders fighting for the stimulus check. We talked about it for months. Bernie Sanders wants to get that check for seniors or debit card, whatever you want to call it. So that's not completely out of the table here. But, Joe Manchin made things difficult. And currently people are saying that they'd rather have Joe Biden control inflation than get the Build Back Better stimulus package done. So guys, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. It seems like the main reason people are frustrated with Biden isn't mostly what he's done. It's what he didn't do, right? He didn't do a good job, quite honestly, of controlling the new variants that came out. He obviously didn't do a good job of controlling inflation. And then we've also had things like supply chain issues and the whole debacle in Afghanistan. It's normal to see polls go down, but he's really been getting hurt badly. And this is why, again, a lot of experts are saying that Democrats should focus on Social Security benefits, potentially get this stimulus check for seniors that Bernie Sanders and the Senior Citizens League is fighting for, and at the same time, make sure they're controlling inflation, guys. So let me know your thoughts on that in the comments below. Now, there's been a lot of talk lately. Let's talk about COLA for a second here, right? The cost of living adjustments. There's been a lot of talk about changing the COLA formula. Now, when you talk about inflation, you talk about CPI, which is just a fancy way of saying inflation, and there's different forms of CPI. There's CPI-U, which when you see inflation in the headlines, you're really seeing CPI-U, which broadly represents almost 90% of the country. Now, something that they actually use for COLA is called CPI-W, which only really represents about 60% of the population, but it more accurately represents people who are moderate to low income, right? And there's been a huge push to change the COLA calculation from using CPI-W to using something called CPI-E. And some experts say that changing that would actually give you a larger COLA every single year. And I've been getting a lot of questions about this in the comments, so I wanted to quickly give you my take on it and give you what the economists and experts are saying on what would happen if they actually change the COLA formula. Now, if you look at this headline, it says, Social Security's COLA adjustment sparked debate about the appropriate measurement used. And to bottom line, you guys here, really changing it from CPI-W to CPI-E, unfortunately, would not make a huge difference in COLA. And experts show and data shows that really this at most would end up giving you like a 0.2% larger COLA every single year. If you average it out over the last 30 years, your COLA would have only gone up by like 0.2% every year. Now, of course, that adds up. We'll take anything we can get, right? But the point I'm trying to make here is all this talk about changing the COLA formula and using CPI-E instead of CPI-W, that's fine. All of these things are steps in the right direction. But quite frankly, that is just a baby step, and that's not going to solve the problem. Really what we need here is we need all of these things President Biden promised and all of these things Bernie Sanders is pushing for. Again, a stimulus check to help you in the near term, raising benefits across the board to make sure not a single senior or person on benefits is forced to live in poverty. So guys, let me know in the comments if you agree. Now, really quick, guys, I'm going to take a few minutes to answer some questions in the chat. Then I'm going to take a look and see if we can hop into the news and see what's trending in the news. So let's take a quick look. Stimulus for seniors on fixed and low income, completely agree. Biden is drowning we the people, Deborah. Enrique said, Joel, you're absolutely right. Joel said, sorry, I can't see that. David said, Trump is too busy planning his next, oh God. All right. Let's see here, folks. Let's see if we can hop in the news. Give me one sec here. Let me see if I can get this going. Now, this is a new program I've been trying to use to share video with you guys. It's been giving me a little bit of trouble, so bear with me here. Let me see if we can get this going. One sec. Let's see if we could hop in. So really what we're doing here is we're looking at all the news going on across the board, whether it's Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, and trying to hop around and see what might be applicable towards seniors. So let's take a look. All right, everyone's talking about this Russia invasion. So let's take a quick look
in the next 24 to 48 hours.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has ordered an additional 3,000 U.S. elite paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne to deploy to Poland to join the 1,700 U.S. troops who deployed there from Fort Bragg last week under the command of Major General Chris Donahue. This as a Stryker brigade of U.S. forces began arriving overland from Germany in Romania, which, like Poland, shares a border with Ukraine.
They are not going to war in Ukraine. They are not going to war with Russia. They're going to defend NATO territory consistent with our Article 5 obligation. They are defensive deployments. They are non-escalatory.
The chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Mark Milley, spoke with his Russian counterpart, General Valery Gerasimov, the brutal Russian general already sanctioned in parts of Europe for killing more than 1,000 Ukrainian soldiers during the 2014 invasion. He oversaw the brutal Russian invasion of Chechnya. General Gerasimov traveled to Belarus.
All right, so everyone's worried about this potential war happening. It looks like they're sending troops to the border, but they're trying to also say, you know what, this is just in case for, defense situations. So not really super applicable towards seniors, but let me know what you guys think in the comments. It looks like Jen Psaki went live, so we could hop in and take a look and see what Jen Psaki said. Let's see. Okay, that's nothing. Let's take a look here. Yeah, everyone's basically talking about Ukraine. Let's see if we can find anything else. Update on Texas. White House to Americans, leave Ukraine in the next 24 to 48 hours. Yeah. Let's take a look here. Kudlow on Fox. Yeah, looks like the news is actually a little bit slow, folks. Let's hop into trending news. Let's see if there's anything happening in trending news. Every employee who leaves Apple becomes an associate. Yeah, kind of slow. Kind of slow in the news, folks, to be honest with you. Let's take a quick look at the stock market. U.S. stocks end sharply lower amid Ukraine fears and as high inflation drags down consumer sentiment. Yeah. So, war is usually not good for the economy either, right? So that's another thing that could potentially make things worse. And war has been known to affect supply chain issues as well as, countries use their resources towards getting ready for things they need for war, obviously. But let's take a quick look. All right, so it looks like Biden actually commented on states dropping their mask mandates. Let me know in the comments, guys. It looks like more and more states are dropping their mask mandates. Let me know if you guys agree with that. I know in general, from my experience, at least on this channel, seniors seem to be a lot more conservative in general when it comes to being careful with this pandemic, whether that's getting vaccinated, wearing masks, social distancing, not getting together in large groups indoors. But let me know your thoughts in the comments. I've already had a lot of people in the comments say that having states and the mask mandates, especially indoor mask mandates, is just, it's a little bit too early. We know cases are going down, but, we've seen this happen every year. In the springtime, cases go down, we ease restrictions, and then in the fall, things get worse, and we go through this yo-yo up and down. But let me know your thoughts in the comments. It looks like President Biden just weighed in on this, and he said it's probably premature for states to drop the face mask requirements as Nevada, including its casinos, become latest to do so. Wow. So it looks like if you want to go to Vegas, guys, and you want to go to the casinos, you no longer have to wear masks. At the same time, the CDC is also sticking with its recommendation to continue wearing protective face masks. So President Joe Biden said it's probably premature for states to drop their indoor face mask requirements when you're indoors, as Nevada became the latest to scrap it at most places, including its casinos. Now, Biden acknowledged that it's tricky to judge whether states announcing in recent days that they're taking that step, most of them run by Democratic governors, are moving too fast. See, for the longest time, we've had this huge divide between Democratic states and Republican states, where Republican states basically had no mandates, and Democrats were, at the beginning, being called draconian mandates, right? And now it looks like Democratic states are removing restrictions even before President Biden and the White House are telling them to do so. So that's interesting, folks. And a lot of people think it's because of the economy, right? We've got the midterm elections coming up in November. Democrats are getting crushed in the polls, and they're looking for anything they can do to try and win their seats in the Senate and the House, right? And, the first thing Republicans are going to come out and say, especially in the swing states, is, Democrats are ruining the economy. They didn't control inflation. And on top of that, they're still creating these mandates, which is hurting the economy even more. Again, those aren't my words. I'm just saying this is why the Democrats are doing this, right? They're doing this for political reasons. And whether it's, the good or not for the American people, let me know your thoughts on that in the comments below. Let's hop back into the news. Let's see if there's anything happening on video. Let's take a look here. Everyone basically seems to be talking about Russia. But let's see. Some early votes in Texas. Heads or tails. Wow, literally everyone's talking about Russia. Let's see. Let's take a look. All right, here's a video on inflation. Let's take a look.
Commodities are always a leading indicator, and commodities react fast, just like the stock market react fast, financial markets react fast. While the rest of the economy, there are a lot of adjustments that take a while. Wage negotiations and other contracts, it takes a while for that to come into play. But the leading indicator of all of them is the money supply. Mm-hmm. And for the last 2 years, the money supply has been soaring by 25% per year. And that has driven up commodity prices and set the whole inflation train into motion.
Well, the three Reagan appointees, fascinating. Yourself, my dear friend Wayne Angell, and my other good friend Manly Johnson. I served with Manly when he was in the Treasury and I was in OMB. You were a terrific threesome on the Federal Reserve Board, and you basically guaranteed price stability and very low inflation expectations, working with Volcker. Not always agreeing, but working with Volcker. Now, Art Laffer, the current Fed, before I even get to the ridiculous nominations who are unqualified to go on the board, but just saying as is, Jay Powell, okay, Jerome Powell, and he's got his Reserve Bank. They don't talk about the money supply. They don't talk about commodity price indicators, as leading indicators of their policy. And I don't think they have an action plan. Art, what do you think?
I don't think so. Let me just say, Robert and Larry, it's really fun being on with the two of you, and I apologize for my dress, but I am up here in the hills of Appalachia. And just so you know, I'm not going for best dressed next year, just for the record. But no, the way Paul Volcker and Robert and Wayne and Manley did it, the way you guys did it as a team, which was spectacular, and Alan Greenspan as well, is you made sure that the money supply didn't grow, the monetary base didn't grow too rapidly, and Paul Volcker stopped that in 79, I think, and 80. And if you look at the commodity price index, which Chuck Cadillac and I had a piece in the Wall Street Journal on Volcker's price rule, which is exactly what he did. It worked, and they let interest rates get up. I think the prime when Reagan took office, January 20th, 81, was 21.5%. These guys have not a clue what monetary policy is. They're talking about raising it maybe 1%, which means you've got a negative real rate of maybe, 6%?
Yeah.
That's just terrible. Makes no sense. I don't see any hope for inflation coming down substantially.
All right, guys, I guess that's enough of that. Well, he's basically saying, obviously that's Fox News, and they're blaming, again, Democrats for inflation. And they're basically saying that the Federal Reserve should be raising interest rates more aggressively. And that's something that's been in the news as well, as the Federal Reserve is supposed to be apolitical, completely separate from Congress, but they're always influenced by who's in charge. Now that President Biden's in charge, a couple of months ago, he had to reappoint who was going to be the Fed chair. And at this point, that's been Jerome Powell. And right before Biden made his decision, he met with Jerome Powell. 2 days later, he said he picked Jerome Powell to be reelected as the Fed chair. And then Jerome Powell immediately came out and said they're going to begin raising interest rates. Now, what conservatives are saying, like on Fox News that I was just showing, is they're not going to be raising interest rates enough. They need to really hit the brakes hard, raise interest rates to make sure they're controlling inflation. Now, how does this affect seniors specifically, right? Well, I'll bottom line you here, guys. Inflation is really, really bad, especially for seniors. Now, with seniors being on a fixed income, you're completely reliant on COLA. And as we've looked over the last 30 years, COLA has not actually kept up with inflation, and benefits purchasing power has been shrinking more and more and more. We looked at some stats earlier. It looked like over the last, I believe it was 20 years, Social Security benefits have gone up by about 50%, but housing has gone up by almost 150%. And then things like food, things like that have gone up way more than COLA. So with inflation is really what I'm trying to say here, one of the worst things that can happen to seniors. And although raising rates comes with its risks as well, mainly some experts are worried that we might be pushed into a recession if they raise interest rates too quickly. Generally, if you're on Social Security benefits, the risk is usually worth the reward, right? So if you're on benefits, basically you most likely want Jerome Powell to raise interest rates aggressively and lower inflation to make sure your purchasing power from your benefits do not continue to shrink. Now, basically, Mitch McConnell's strategy here for the midterms is to blame Democrats for inflation, blame them for crime that's happening in Democratic cities, and basically use that to just wipe them out and take over the House and the Senate, at which point Mitch McConnell would be the Senate Majority Leader once again. And we all know what it was like when Mitch McConnell was the Senate Majority Leader. Nothing got done. He took pride in calling himself the Grim Reaper in the Senate, making sure that absolutely nothing got done, except for, of course, that first stimulus package. Well, again, half of you guys vote Republican, half of you guys vote Democrat, but the truth is, if you want an increase in Social Security benefits, if you want SSI, SSDI increased, all of these things really, our best chance is having Democrats in control of both chambers. And even then, they've had control of both chambers and things are moving much too slow. So if you're giving up on Democrats, I don't blame you. But at the same time, it almost seems like they're the lesser of two evils when it comes to trying to get our benefits increased. So let's take a quick look on Twitter, guys. Mitch McConnell came out and said, "This all-Democrat government was warned that their radical agenda would supercharge inflation, and they pushed ahead anyway. Now rampant inflation and soaring prices are crushing the American people." Guys, let me know in the comments if you agree. Do you think Biden's agenda caused inflation? Personally, I'll give you my opinion. I don't think they really caused it, but I think they should have seen the iceberg coming and they could have prevented it, right? They could have got ahead of this and put policies in place to try and prevent this from getting so bad. So although really most experts think it's the supply chain issues causing inflation, they could have done something ahead of time to try and ease the pain. They could have bought fuel and gas in 2020 when it was dirt cheap. They could have done things like do an inflation tax credit to help the American people deal with inflation. There's so many things across the board they could have done, and quite frankly, they dropped the ball. So he went on to say that American workers have been earning pay raises, but the Democrats' inflation is more than outpacing them. Factoring in inflation, the average American worker has gotten a 2% pay cut under Democratic policies. And it's pretty much the exact same thing when it comes to Social Security benefits. You got a 5.9% COLA, inflation's at 7.5%. That's basically a 1.6% pay cut in benefits. So folks, that's going to be about it for this video. Really quick to end it, I'm going to hop in the chat, answer a few questions. Let's take a look. Joel Scott said, "No more wars on solid soils." Let's see. Enrique said, "Don't worry, Mitch McConnell is going to retire very soon. He did stand up to Donald Trump." Yeah, he did. And, the party's pretty divided right now. There's the Trump part of the party, and then there's the Mitch McConnell side. All right, guys, so that's going to be it for this video. Again, just to recap, we talked about the fact that Mitch McConnell flipped out, saying that with this new inflation data coming out yesterday, it's fully Biden and Democrats' fault that inflation got worse. He went on to say that really the best thing that could happen for the American people is for Republicans to take over both chambers, what they call a red wave, in these midterm elections. And as we looked at the polls, Democrats are getting blamed for inflation and they're getting blamed for the economy doing poorly. So guys, let me know in the comments. Again, we also talked about that $1,400 stimulus check that some groups are pushing for. Bernie is still pushing for that $1,000 stimulus check. Then we have the Senior Citizens League, which is basically a lobbying group in DC, pushing for a $1,400 stimulus check as well. Again, old news, but they recently came out and doubled down, saying that with inflation getting even worse, seniors need this check more than ever. So with that said, folks, thank you so much for watching. Again, I will keep you updated as things develop on Social Security changes, what's happening with President Biden's agenda, and everything that affects seniors across the board, whether that's inflation, what's happening with the economy, and politics at large as well. So guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.